So, Andrew, are you in favor of a small government?
No.
Why?
Because small government usually is mediocre, and you need to have X amount of diplomats, you need to have X amount of statesmen, you have to represent 300 million people. In this particular case, I would actually advocate that you have far more congressmen. That way you didn't have an electoral state which was as messed up as ours is. So that's what I would do. I would actually expand the electorate because, having only 2 senators per state is probably not a great idea, just so you know.
And alimony, your thoughts on that?
I think that in some rare instances that can be adjudicated and has been traditionally adjudicated by the church if alimony is necessary.
The church?
The church, yeah. I don't see why the state needs to become involved in a religious ceremony. Can you give me a reason? Can you give me a reason why secularists need to get married? Any of you? Like, why is that a good idea?
Well, I would assume because they love each other.
You can love each other without marriage. It's a religious.
Okay,
sacrament.
but you might have a tradition in your family that you would want to get married.
You mean that came from the religious people in your family?
Hold on.
Right.
I'm curious.
Yes,
so
it did.
You want to take the institution of marriage and make it like completely separate from the legal institution. So you would get no tax benefits for being a married couple.
You don't need.
You would,
yeah. So just to address these one at a time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to be married in order to address tax benefits for couples. You recognize this, right, Lauren?
I'm asking if you. I'm
and
asking.
I just answered. I just answered your question. You don't actually.
No,
you don't need to be married for tax benefits because you can address the tax system separate from marriage. It's ridiculous.
Okay, but so you think that's the only. So.
Oh, you mean changing it?
So he's saying that the only reason that the government is involved in marriage at all is to monitor taxes, and then taxes could be monitored.
I didn't say that at all. You just straw-manned my entire argument.
I'm trying to understand.
She's asking you a question.
And I just answered her question, and then she straw-manned the position. So, like, if you want to know the position, just ask, and I'll give it to you.
She was literally just doing that. Like,
no, she literally wasn't drunky. She literally didn't. So anyway, back to what you were asking me, Lauren, just to give you the answer to your question.
Okay, let me rephrase the question, if you don't mind. How is the government and marriage currently intertwined?
So right now they're the adjudicators. So at the moment, you have to go to the state in order to become licensed, and you also have to go to the state in order to get the license revoked. So essentially, they operate as a middleman adjudication system between the partnership and the marriage. So I think that can be done by the church, and it doesn't need to be done by the state at all. It's never been necessary, nor is that something which is traditional. That is not a traditional thing which is done.
So if you separated it, right? So if you separated this into like a religious ceremony, and you had the states not involved in marriages at all. However, the state would still monitor couples for the purposes of taxation. So what would that look like?
The same thing it looks like right now. Literally, it would look like the same thing it looks like right now.
It's no longer a religious thing. It's no longer for the dignity of family. There's in legal precedent, a lot of marriage issues have to do with the dignity of families and creating the best society possible.
Yeah, it's encouraging birth rates, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I agree.
You're just going to interrupt me every time I talk and then complain if I interrupt you.
Okay, well, give me the signal when you're done, because it sounds like you're winding down, so I'm just trying to answer your question.
I'm not talking.
That's when I'm talking. Let's see if that ever happens, but go ahead.
I could see why you complain about no-fault divorces. I could see you wanting to grasp onto your wife as best as you can. I could see that she's probably
Oh, great. What a swell argument. Are you going to get to an argument? Because I'm still waiting for one.
Dude, I lost my...
I'm sure you did.
Go ahead. Say what you were going to say, because you wanted to interrupt me.
Well, wait a second. You're saying that just a minor interruption, you derailed your entire train of thought?
Oh my God, you guys are both doing the same thing right now. Just get to your points, both of you, for the love of God.
You get to your point, Andrew.
My point is that you don't need to have the state involved in marriage at all.
Okay. So how is that system going to work? So now the state is not involved in marriages, but however, you're saying the state is still involved in couples being taxed differently than single people. So then couples will also want to be triples for tax purposes, maybe business partners, and then also maybe father and daughter maybe would want for tax purposes to live together. So will that be allowed by the state? Does this change things? Because it's no longer a sexual family dynamic. So I'm curious as how this is now going to work in your new society. And also
what do you so here I'll answer. Okay, sorry, go ahead. I thought you were done talking. My bad. Go ahead. You got the floor still.
I'll let you answer that.
Okay, so first of all you're talking about here is changing one position, which is that the government itself no longer issues marriage licenses. They don't need to do it. For the purposes of taxation, they still are going to track who's cohabitating. They've always tracked who's cohabitating. We have the U.S. Census, which is great at doing this. You have Social Security numbers for your job. And if you want to have tax benefits and tax breaks and things like that, you could maybe engage in what's called a civil union. There's states which have had those for an awful long time, and you can do that. That's how homosexuals used to be able to get married, is through a civil union. They would get all of the same protections of a marriage without it being the actual sacrament of marriage. And then if you want to have no-fault divorce for your secular marriages, fine. But I think that you should probably push for some kind of sacrament or some kind of value to marriage if you want people to remain married. I can demonstrate this by the fact that religious people get divorced less, yet they seem to be happier in their marriages.
Do you know the legal distinctions between a civil union and a marriage?
I couldn't hear you. Say that again.
Do you know the legal distinctions between a civil union and a marriage?
Depends on the state.
Okay, but for instance, when a spouse dies in a civil union, do they receive the estate or part of the estate, especially in a homestead state?
I mean,
Florida?
let's assume for a second none of them could. You, as the secularist who introduced civil unions instead of marriage, could easily ratify that for whatever secular framework that you wanted. So whatever non-religious framework that you wanted to add in and call it a civil union, another than religious union, you could add in whatever the hell you wanted.
So this is essentially marriage, but with a different terminology.
Whatever you want to call it. We wouldn't recognize it as marriage. We would recognize you as like people who are playing house or something.
Then why don't churches just have their own ceremony?
They do.
But they don't recognize the state.
They do. The state doesn't recognize that ceremony.
Don't Catholics not recognize the state divorce anyway?
The state.
So they already do.
So I'm going to explain this so that you understand. The state itself does not recognize religious marriage by itself. So the state itself still has to issue a license, and you are still subject to the state for the purposes of you being able to get divorced. You understand the distinction there? There's a huge distinction. Yeah.
Not religiously, because if you're Catholic, the priest still won't sanctify your divorce, so you won't be considered divorced. And I know this because my dad's Catholic, and there was issue with my grandma with divorce, whatever.
Yeah, Catholics are really weird about that stuff. I agree.
So even though her partner wanted a divorce from his wife to marry my grandma, he couldn't. He had to wait for her to die in order to marry my grandma, even though he was legally divorced, because the church wouldn't recognize
church said
it. So
no.
that's already, your dream world already exists.
No, it doesn't. So first of all, the
yes,
Catholic,
it does, because the church has
the
a
Catholic Church
of marriage than
stop.
the state. The state
You're missing the point.
The church did it.
You're missing the point. The enforcement arm's not the church. The enforcement arm is still the state. So he still had to go. Stop and let me finish. He still had to go and get divorced by the state, right?
I mean, if it was just religious.
Answer my question. Did he have to go to the state and get divorced?
No, because he had to wait for his wife to die, right?
You just got done saying that he got divorced, but he couldn't still leave the marriage because the Catholic Church wouldn't let him, right?
Right. So now you're
okay. So then he did have to go to the state, and the state did have to give him a divorce.
Either way, he had to wait for his wife to die.
Because he was adhering to his religious institution, but he still had to go to the state, Lauren, to get a divorce, Lauren. You just said he did.
If he wanted to separate the state ties of his marriage, which is what the state would be regulating in this civil union system that you're setting up.
No, the state wouldn't be regulating anything with religious marriage. Why would they be regulating
so now you want the church to dictate the separation, which would be the cause of these civil unions.
Yes, I want the church to. If you're going to do a sacramental.
You're going to interrupt me when I'm
answering your question. Yes. The answer is yes. I want the church to adjudicate that.
First of all, have you heard of the separation of church and state? Have you heard of this concept?
This would separate the church and state. What are you talking about?
Wait, hold on. I think we're kind of going in circles a little bit here. I just want to try and keep us back on track. So I guess I'm not necessarily cutting anyone off here, but like, Andrew, like, if you can already get married via the church without being legally binding currently, then what are you complaining about? Why did you get married for a legal purpose? Which I assume you did. I'm not sure your particular situation. Like, if you're saying that you could just do a ceremony with the church, right? That's what you're wanting, yes?
No, currently priests cannot marry you without the state.
Well, I mean, but it would be like you could have that within like your religious practice. It just wouldn't be legally binding, correct?
No, you really can't have that because there's.
But that's what you want, yes?
Yes, there's laws that make that illegal. So usually a priest.
Or make it illegal.
Yes. A priest often in most states, I think, actually has to have the authority of the state and issue you a marriage license in order to marry you.
Are you talking about bigamy laws?
No, I'm not talking about bigamy laws.
Well, I just don't understand why you can't just have that done.
Sorry, then what law are you referring to? Because I've never heard of a law that a religious ceremony couldn't take place without the state's
You
permission.
can make
like literally never heard of this.
so
Right,
you can make
exactly.
you can make that, but it's not a recognized marriage. The state should still have to recognize
by the state, not recognized
Yeah, by the
by
state, but you don't
Stop.
want it to be recognized by the
The
state.
state stop. The state should still have to recognize the marriage. That doesn't mean that they have the authority to adjudicate it.
Stop proving I'm making bad points. Stop.
You are making bad points.
What would that look like then?
No, you're the one making
What's
bad
okay?
points.
What's the
What
problem
does
with my
recognized by the
argument?
state
Give
mean
me
if it
give
has
me
no
an actual
like, value from the
problem
state?
with my argument. Let me frame it the best way I
I just don't
possibly
understand what
can.
your argument is.
I'm
trying.
trying. That's why I'll try to frame it as best I can. The state does not need to adjudicate religious marriage. However, the state should have to recognize religious marriage.
What does that mean?
It means that the state is going to have to recognize that you're married by the church and recognize the church's authority to be the adjudicator over the divorce portion of it.
Okay, but what does that mean?
I
in
just
practice? Is
explained
just
it.
that your
How
last
stupid
name?
are you? Like, I just literally explained it.
You really didn't explain that.
How-
at all.
how-
So are you
how
saying
much
that they
more
would
can I
have,
explain
like,
this?
The recognition
Just
of like
let
the
her
last
finish
name.
your question.
Yeah, like you're talking about like the last name.
Well, I just keep
acknowledgement?
answering
Are
the
you talking
same
about tax
question.
benefits, like what are we? You did not answer that question at all.
Okay, so as far as it comes to what? Tax benefits, things like this?
Is that what you mean when you say
Perfect,
recognize?
yes.
Yeah, well,
Yes, that is what I'm asking.
whatever the benefits are that the state's going to offer up or whatever. Yes, it needs to be a recognized
you want the
marriage.
church to be involved in adjudication of state issues.
Well, it's not
involving
it's not just a
taxation.
state issue.
It
The
is-
state is a
The
composition of
tax
people.
part is.
Sure,
Stop.
it's both.
Stop.
Exactly,
The
but it
state's
is
a composition of people, Lauren. Okay, so people should be able to be allowed to have their own adjudicators separate of the state, and they traditionally always have. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Traditionally always have since what time period?
Throughout most of history, the church has been the
So,
dominion,
In the United
and
States,
the
ever?
church has been the dominion over divorce throughout most of human history. These are religious sacraments. These are
when?
not secularist sacraments. That only
Well, okay.
began during the Enlightenment period when they really started to push through laws when it came to divorce in order to promote the health and welfare of the individuals inside of these nations. But the
When in the United States did this happen?
I don't know what the exact dates were.
Never.
No, listen. Did the United States change from no-fault divorce?
That happened, but that's completely different.
Okay,
than
so hang on.
adjudication by
Before
the
then, if you're going backwards, it's ridiculous for you to expect me to know the exact date that this change shifted
happened.
drastically. So yes, it has happened. I just told you traditionally the church has always been the adjudicator for who
Not
got
in the
married and
United
who got
States.
divorced. Yes.
So,
Who do you think founded the United States, Lauren? Who do you think founded it? Who got here first?
Like, in what sense?
Native Americans.
Who got to America
Landed
first?
On the United,
Yes.
Like, I'd say Vikings are probably. Are you talking about the country? Like, I'm so confused.
In the
It's like,
United,
this is what
the United
Africa
States,
is.
the
Like,
United
I'm
States
from
had
California,
the United
but
States had
Ireland,
Puritans.
Ireland.
Lauren, the United States had Puritans who got here. Puritan Christians. Okay, they were not appealing to the state because the church was the state. Okay, they were the state.
And did they
Well-
put up the Constitution of the United States?
No, that came later.
Okay. So it's not so the United States never, right, had the church adjudicated.
You mean the same United
when
States that
Black
claims
women
all men are
went
created equal? Doesn't say anything about women being created equal. Didn't allow women to have suffrage. Didn't allow women to have any of those things. Didn't allow women to vote because they weren't stakeholders. Also made sure that they had limited access to property. Aren't these all feminist?
pivot.
Aren't these all feminist propaganda?